Welcome back to the final part of our mini mal build series. So in the last video we finished shaping this thing and got it ready for fiberglassing, and in this video, well, you guessed it, we're going to hit the fiberglassing and also look at how we install the fin and board hardware for this particular board. So like always, huge thanks to DIYsurfboardkits.com for making this possible, and yeah, let's just jump into it. Now there's a bit of a controversial topic about when and how to install your board's hardware. So that is your fin box, leash plug, and your vent plug in a hollow core surfboard situation. I personally like to install my hardware after the fiberglass has gone down, but before the top coat, so that is the final gloss coat, so to speak. Now that said, I actually suggest that you take your board to a professional fiberglasser so that you're guaranteed to get a good lamination or good fiberglassing. If that's what you decide to do, it's probably worth talking to your fiberglasser and seeing what they suggest, because they may prefer that the hardware be installed ahead of time and they'll just mask it off and take care of everything for you. Or they may say, do it after the top coat in your own shed, just, you know, whatever. So basically talk to your fiberglasser and do what they suggest. Now, I'm not a fiberglasser by any means. I have done it quite a few times, so I'm comfortable doing it myself, but I even have a professional fiberglasser that comes in and glasses my boards once a week when they're in there anyway. So I'm not going to take you through it step by step in this video. We're just going to shoot it and give you a little bit of a description, but take it upon yourself to research all the ins and outs of fiberglassing and figure out if it's something that you're willing to do. Just before we go into the finishing room, I use a 4-ounce cloth and we do 2 layers on the top and 1 layer on the bottom. Now, there's a lot of methods that you can use for fiberglassing with how you go about masking and everything. So have a Google, but this is the method that I like to use. So the first side that I coat in fiberglass is the bottom side. That only gets the 1 layer of 4-ounce surfboard cloth, which is just a fiberglass weave. But we do need to mask around the board here to where we want the rail to wrap. In my case, that's basically masking where the deck skin starts to meet the rail. So what this masking is as we drape the fabric over, this is basically where we're going to be pushing it onto the rail, and then we can take a sharp razor knife and do a cut along this tape line and rip it all off. This just makes for a much neater approach for surfboards. It's not necessary, but it's what I like to do. Alright, so with that zip done, now we can flip the board over and start laying out the glass. Yeah, once you've got the glass oriented on the board so it looks good, then you can trim around it. I leave about 50 mil or 2 inches roughly of overhang. Now then, up where the radiuses start to come around, so basically the nose and the tail on this particular board, we just want to take a bit of a cut so that we can actually wrap this nose like so. And now we're just about ready to start putting the epoxy on. Everything's padded out really nice. And what I'm going to be using for spreading the epoxy is just this plastic scraper, which I can just move the epoxy around on and just make sure that we're getting good coverage everywhere. So one of these is all we need. So with the squeegee, you're just basically moving the epoxy in a fluid motion, and you're not wanting to overwork it, because the more you work it, the more air you can introduce to the into the mixture. But you also don't want to have any dry spots, so you're kind of pushing down into the cloth at the same time. Now once you have your actual deck looking like you've got good coverage, then you start working the epoxy out to the overhanging rail, and we start saturating that fabric there while working on getting everything nice and smooth. Alright, now we can start trying to get this rail pressed down around the rail onto that tape that we put on the other side. Okay, so that has dried and I flipped the board over, did the zip cut and removed all the excess fiberglass, and then just gave it a quick sanding to remove any of the kind of over creep. On top of that, I also masked the rail again for our overhang. So now I'm just going to lay out some cloth over the top here, trim it to size, and fiberglass at the top. Now the bottom got one 4-ounce layer, whereas the top gets two 4-ounce layers of cloth. You can go up to 6-ounce and one 4-ounce if you're wanting a little bit of extra impact resistance on the deck or you're a particularly heavy rider, but 2 layers of 4-ounce cloth seems to be pretty universally accepted as the go-to. Alright, so same process as the bottom, you just pat it out, get it all smooth, or trim the overhang and then start applying the fiberglass. So the process for the top deck is the exact same as the bottom deck. The only difference is that here you're applying the resin to 2 layers of fiberglass, so you are going to need a little bit more resin. Other than that, it's the exact same process, just work it in and get things looking good. So with the fiberglass done, we still have more work to do with the fiberglassing, which is the top coat or the hot coat, but now is the time that I install my hardware. So I'm going to start on the top deck and do the vent plug as well as the leash plug. We'll let that dry, flip the board over, and we'll install the fin box. You'll remember that we marked the position for our vent plug. Well, that's what we're going to drill out now. So I've just got a drill bit which is just slightly larger than the plug's diameter. That means that we can fill this with resin and really get a good fit in there. And we're basically going to drill it to depth where this is flush with the top. There we go. Now for the leash plug, we're basically doing the same thing on the center line. I'm just masking the area in which I think it's going to be installed. And we'll mark a center line and drill the correct depth for this. So because we're pressing this in surrounded by resin, we don't really want the resin to fall into this plug. So I'm just going to mask off the top with a bit of an old school trick. So get some good quality masking tape over the top like so. Then with a soft face mallet or hammer, just hit that tape all around the ridge. This is an old school way of forming gaskets. Then you can just peel off the excess tape. And that's what we're left with. Alright, so that's the plug, and this is just some of the fiberglass offcut. So just going to cut a little circle out of it, just freehand's fine, which we can now press in with some resin, like so, and be sure that we have a nicely reinforced install. Alright, so this is just some resin which I'm mixing up in a cup. And this is our install material of choice. And as we push it in, we should get good overflow. Now this whole deck does get sanded, so you don't have to be too concerned if you get some overspill, but we will clean up most of it. Now installing the fin box is just a matter of basically doing the same thing, except obviously this time we're routing out a slot instead of drilling a hole. So to do that, I've got a router bit with a pattern bearing, so that's a top mount bearing, and I made this little template which is sized perfectly for our fin boxes. Now, these are in the works, so we will be making this available on our website for purchase. It's basically going to have one of these for each style of fin box. But if you have a look at it, it's pretty easy to make. It's just a piece of wood, in this case it's acrylic, with a slot cut out of it the same size as our bit. Now we've scribed our center line using a chalk line on the board, and basically we just have to line this up to our center line. So you won't be able to see it on camera, but inside of this slot is 2 scribe lines, and that represents the middle or the center of this template. Right, and then to start this pattern, we're going to need a hole that our bit can drop into. So I'm just going to drill a hole here. So now the idea is we drop this into there, start the router. The bearing follows the template and cuts out the perfect size slot. And yeah, that's all there is to it. Okay, so that's pass 1. Now we're going to drop the route a bit lower and take the second pass. And we'll basically keep doing this until the depth of our slot is the same depth as the fin box, or whichever depth we need. Eventually we'll take off the acrylic template and just go straight onto the board itself. But while we have it, we might as well use it. All right guys, so I stuffed up. I went all the way through the board, and there is 2 reasons for that. So the first reason, and this is the biggest one, is that the depth here should have only been 27 millimeters, and I've gone all the way down to 30. So that was mistake number 1. If I had have left it at 28 like I was meant to, I wouldn't have punched all the way through for 1. Now the second thing is, my position was a good 5 millimeters too far towards the tail, which again would have saved me from bursting through even if I was at the depth. You see where my ruler here is kind of pointing to? Hopefully that shows up in the camera. That's where we should have been stopped. So as you can see, we would have had a good 2 millimeters roughly, actually 3 millimeters of safety material in the thinnest point, and it quickly runs up to 5 millimeters. But yeah, nothing we can do about it now, so I'm just going to mask that off on the underside really heavily, pour the resin, and glue this thing in place. With that little blowout patch, I just poured some black resin down there ahead of the time, and that will just seal it up at least. It's not ideal, but it will look okay. And here I've just got some resin which I've tinted black to match the fin box, and just thickened up a little bit as well. So we just want to make sure that we have lots in there so that we don't have any gaps. So something that I failed to mention here was, once you have your fin box set, you should install a fin and just check that it is actually square to the board. If it's not, you can just use a bit of tape to bring everything into square and hold it in place until the glue dries. Once it is all dry, you can just sand it smooth, and then you can go back to the glassing room. Okay, so with all the plugs and things installed, now it's time to do the top coat of the resin. Now, some epoxies and things aren't suitable for top coats, some are. The Kinetics resin that I'm using is, so it's the same resin as before, but this time what we're doing is we're doing the hot coat or the top coat, whatever you want to call it, and we're going to pour it on and then brush it out nice and thick, working it, you know, evenly across the board, just making sure everything's flattened out, and then we're leaving it. So as we pour the resin, we're going to be spreading it with a brush to get a nice heavy coat everywhere. So we're going up and down the board, then across the board, then up and down the board again lightly, making sure that everything's got good coverage, and then, you know, just looking at it to make sure it's nice and smooth. And if it is, we walk away and we don't touch it. Now, once it's good and you've walked away, actually do not touch it. If you see that there's a hair in it, don't grab it. If you see anything, just walk away. Fix it after. Now, I'm just quickly going over it now, just to see how it's all looking. Make sure we haven't missed a spot, but more importantly, that everything is uniform. Okay, so we'll let that dry and we'll come back and do the bottom coat tomorrow. So you can see that I've masked around the entire board and I'm coming up about halfway on the rail. Some boards you'll actually want to dam off the tail, so you can actually build a bit of a dam and get a really sharp 90-degree edge with your resin, and you can shape that in. I'm not doing it on this particular board because we've already got a pretty good dam happening from the fiberglassing process, but do keep in mind that you may want to dam up your tail, but in this case, we are good. So that resin is now fully mixed. Basically what we're going to do is just pour it on the board here, brush it out, that's it. Then we sand it with high grit sandpaper, like a 600 grit, preferably wet so you don't get dust everywhere, but you can do it however you want. And then you buff it up with a car polisher and some fiberglass cutting compound, and that's it. There's a lot more to fiberglassing than meets the eye, but for now, this will be a good enough job for us to get our first mini mal out and on the water. So the only thing left to do is to drill a hole through your vent plug so it actually vents, and install the Gore-Tex valve. So I'm going to do this gently because if you fall through and drill through your board, that's a bad thing. So all we're doing is going nice and gentle until we see that we have a hole. That's it. Now we can install the valve. Okay. All right, so that is it, guys. That is all there is to building your board. Now, unfortunately, I was planning to finish this video with me making a fool of myself out surfing this thing, but because of the fact that we burst through with our fin, I have a big cavity down here which I need to fill in with another top coat. So that means actually sanding this back a little bit and doing another coat of resin on the top deck. And that's not really all that bad because there is a few blemishes which wasn't ideal. I didn't really put enough time into prepping the surface when I did that top coat. So there is a few little low spots which I just didn't get with polishing this out. But I'm not going to show you guys that. It's just the exact same thing that we've done in this video. So I'm going to end it here, and in the next build I'm going to open that series with me making a fool of myself surfing this thing in, you know, knee-high waves. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed this series. Huge thanks to, well, my company, DIY Surfboard Kits, for doing this video series for us. And yeah, make sure you check us out at DIYsurfboardkits.com and have a look at our range. Starting early next year, we're even going to be holding workshops in-house where you guys can attend and build your own board with my guidance and leave here with a finished product and hit the waves. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.